In the event your Force Pro trolling motor shaft cracks or breaks and needs a replacement, this video will walk you through the steps to replace the shaft to normal operation. For this process, you will need a number 1 and number 2 Phillips head screwdriver, a 2.5mm hex bit driver, 3mm hex bit driver, 2 4mm hex bit drivers, 10mm socket, a 14mm socket, a wrench, torque wrench, zip ties, clippers, and the replacement Force Pro shaft. You will also need a wooden 2x4 or something suitable to place between the two scissors on the mount. When assembling the motor, you must use non-power tools to install all the parts, observing the torque specifications when provided. Using power tools to assemble the motor may damage the component and void the warranty. For this install, the trolling motor will need to be stowed and deployed. 2 people are recommended for positioning between stowed and deployed positions to avoid injury or damage. First, remove power from the trolling motor and disconnect the transducer cable from the back of the chart plotter. Remove the 4 screws holding the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Lift the top of the shaft cap. Next, disconnect the USB cable. Push the lever and disconnect the data connection. If you have a sonar connection, disconnect the sonar cable. Now remove the shaft cap. Clip the zip ties holding the positive and negative wires using the clippers. Pull back the rubber sleeves on the power cables to expose the terminals. Next, loosen the set screws on the power and ground cables using a 2.5mm hex bit driver. Disconnect the power and ground cables in the shaft cap. Next, remove the 4 small black screws holding the coil cable bracket in the shaft cap using a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Slide the cable bracket off the coil cable and remove it from the opening on the bottom of the shaft cap housing. Now remove the coil cable from the shaft cap. Remove the cable clips holding the transducer cable and coil cable together. Keep these in a safe place. They will need to be used again. Remove the bracket that secures the power cable using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Remove the 2 cable clips holding both power and transducer cables to the mount using a 3mm hex bit driver. Remove the cable clips holding the transducer cable and coil cable together. Remove the power cable through the mounts channel, followed by the transducer. Push the square rubber grommet through the bottom of the shaft cap and remove it from the transducer cable. Take the transducer cable and pull it through the square hole. Remove the two bolts, washers, and nuts at the base of the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Then, remove the rubber covers from the power and ground wires to give clearance to pull the cables from the shaft. Remove the bottom of the shaft cap housing from the shaft along with the rubber grommet below the shaft cap. Be aware of the power and data cables. Followed by the transducer cable. Slide the rubber wedge off the shaft. Now deploy the trolling motor. Remove the 4 screws holding the depth limiter with a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Then remove the depth limiter and the 2 half-moon pieces holding the shaft and the steering servo. The next steps will require 2 people to remove the shaft from the steering servo. You will also need a wooden 2x4. Have one person deploy the trolling motor halfway. The other person can then place something suitable between the two scissors of the mount to provide extra security. The person deploying should hold the pull cable in place as an extra safety measure when removing the shaft. Be careful when loosening the adjustment collar. The motor and shaft will drop down when loosened. Now loosen the depth adjustment collar while holding the bottom of the motor with one hand. Slide the shaft down and remove the shaft from the steering servo housing. Make sure none of the cables catch on the steering servo. Carefully pull the transducer cable through the steering servo housing. The trolling motor can now be fully deployed with the shaft removed. Lay the shaft on your workbench or table. Now remove the nut, lock washer, and anode using a 14mm socket. Gently remove the propeller from its shaft. Remove the pin. Make sure to keep all screws, washers, anode, and nut of the skeg and propeller parts. Remove the 4 screws holding the skeg using a 4mm hex bit driver. Next, remove the single screw on the bottom of the nose cone using a 3mm hex bit driver. Remove the 2 screws on the front of the motor using a 4mm hex bit driver. Now remove the nose cone from the motor. Be careful with the transducer cable, as the transducer will still be attached. Remove the recessed nut that secures the transducer cable to the shaft using the tool included in the transducer replacement kit. Next, we will remove the motor drive from the shaft. Loosen the 4 bolts, rubber O-rings, and washers holding the shaft and motor drive using a 4mm hex bit driver. Straighten the cables at the top of the shaft. Gently pull the propeller drive motor away from the shaft base until you see the power cable and data cables connected to the propeller drive motor. Gently pull the cable gland from the transducer cable. Holding the cables only, gently pull them through the shaft. Take care that the ring terminals and data cable connector do not get caught on the top of the shaft. Carefully pull the transducer cable straight down through the bottom of the shaft until it is completely removed from the shaft. Continue pulling the transducer cable through the hole in the front of the shaft base, along with the rubber cable gland and the recessed nut. Replace the 1-inch O-ring on the recessed nut with the 1-inch O-ring in the replacement kit. Apply grease to the O-ring. We will go in reverse to put the motor drive and shaft back on the subassembly. Feed the transducer cable with the threaded side up through the recessed nut and the hole in the front of the shaft base and through the bottom of the replacement Force Pro shaft. Feed the transducer cable through the shaft after feeding it through the bottom of the shaft base. Leave 2 feet of the transducer cable for the motor drive installation. Apply grease to the new 3-inch O-ring using the grease packet included in the replacement Force Pro shaft. Place the new O-ring in the groove on the shaft base. Remove the O-ring from the top of the propeller drive motor and discard it. Apply grease to the 36mm O-ring. Thread the cables from the propeller drive motor through the new 36mm O-ring in the replacement Force Pro shaft. Place the new O-ring in the groove of the propeller drive motor. Blow out any dirt or debris in the 4 threaded holes on the top of the propeller drive motor using canned compressed air or an air compressor. Bundle the power and data cables from the propeller drive with electric tape if they are not already aligned, straightened, and bundled. Feed the power and data cables from the propeller drive motor up through the shaft until they emerge from the top. Gently pull the ends of the power and data cables as you feed them the rest of the way through the shaft. Prepare the 4 bolts by placing a washer and a 3/16" O-ring on each one. Apply grease to the bolt and O-ring on all 4 bolts. Avoid getting grease on the threads. Thread all 4 of the prepared bolts halfway to make sure that the shaft base and the propeller drive motor are properly aligned using a ball head 4mm hex bit or driver. Lightly tighten all 4 bolts by hand once the shaft base and propeller base are properly aligned. tighten all 4 bolts to 35 inch-pounds using a torque wrench. Pull the transducer cable straight and measure 15 inches from where the cable enters the transducer. Apply grease to all surfaces of the cable gland. Gently pull the excess cable through the top of the shaft until the cable gland fits into the hole on the shaft base. Place the recessed nut into the hole on the shaft base and tighten it using the included tool. Route the transducer cable through the nose cone so it will fit correctly onto the propeller drive motor. Now place the nose cone back on the motor. Make sure not to pinch the transducer cable. The pocket above the nose cone will hold the transducer cable in place. Insert the 2 screws in the front of the nose cone to secure to the motor using a 4mm hex bit driver. Insert the screw into the bottom of the nose cone and tighten using a 3mm hex bit driver. Place the skeg back on the trolling motor, making sure the long side of the skeg is facing the propeller. Insert the 4 screws and tighten using a 4mm hex bit driver. Insert the pin through the propeller motor shaft. If necessary, rotate the motor shaft to orient the pin horizontally so it is less likely to fall out during installation. Align the channel on the inside of the propeller with the pin and slide the propeller onto the motor shaft. Place the anode, washer, lock washer, and nut onto the end of the motor shaft. Using a 14mm socket, tighten the lock nut to 6 foot-pounds to secure the propeller. Make sure the split connector and rubber O-ring are attached to the transducer cable. Feed the power and data cables through the adjustment collar. The shaft is keyed to fit the steering system one way only. Place your 2x4 or suitable brace between the 2 scissors on the mount. Feed the power and data cables through the servo housing. Align the shaft key to the bottom of the steering system and insert the shaft and push it up through the top. Tighten the depth adjustment collar on the base of the steering system. It may be helpful to move the motor mount up about halfway to make it easier to install the shaft. Insert the 2 half-moon pieces of the depth limiter collar on top of the steering servo housing. Align the 2 outer halves of the depth limiter collar and tighten the 4 screws using a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Align the rubber wedge into the slot along the shaft. Feed the transducer cable through the bottom of the shaft cap. Feed the transducer cable completely through the square hole in the shaft cap. Then, feed the cables through the bottom of the shaft cap. Next, align the bottom of the shaft cap on the notch of the shaft and slide it down on the rubber wedge. Install the bolts, washers, and nuts in the base of the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Install the grommet on the transducer cable. Take your transducer cable and route through the cable channel located on the side of the mount. Then, follow with the power cable through the same channel. Make sure to route the transducer through the channel first. This will make installation easier. Place the cable clips over the transducer and power cable. Secure the cable clips with the 2 screws using a 3mm hex bit driver. Place the remaining cable clip in the slot on the side of the mount, securing the power and transducer cables using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Place the cable clips back on to hold the transducer cable and the coil cable together. Then, place the rubber covers back on the power and ground wire. Insert the coil cables into the bottom of the shaft cap. Slide the cable bracket on the coil cable and reattach it to the bottom of the shaft cap housing. Tighten the 4 screws provided in the service kit using a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Using a 2.5mm hex bit driver, tighten the set screws on the power and ground cables. slide the rubber covering back over the power and ground cables. Secure the power and ground cables to the bottom of the shaft cap using 4 zip ties. Reconnect the USB cable and the data cable to the antenna box. Place the lid on the shaft cap. Install the 4 screws to secure the lid of the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Finally, plug the GT56 UHD transducer back into the 12-pin port on the chart plotter. Now connect the trolling motor to power. Test the trolling motor by powering on from the power button located on the E-box. And that's it. Thanks for watching. For more help, please subscribe to the Garmin Support YouTube channel and visit marinesupport.garmin.com.